Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of America What the Fuck. I'm Chelsea, your resident attorney, social worker, and advocate, and regrettably, constitutional law aficionado. Before I get into what this week's episode is about, which, if you are a lawyer, you took one look at the title and had flashbacks to con law and said, not this shit again. If you're not a lawyer, you're probably like, who the fuck is Marbury and why is he mad at Madison? We'll get there. But first, I want to remind you guys that we are on all available places where you can get your podcasts. So make sure to like, rate, subscribe wherever you are listening to this. It really does help the show out a lot. Second, I really want to just take a moment to acknowledge the moment that we are in. The United States is in the middle of one long, ongoing constitutional crisis. And for folks out there who are listening to this because you know me and you might be familially obligated to listen to this podcast, I really want you to pay attention to this episode. This episode really drives to the core of what I believe the Trump administration is doing to our current governmental system. For the last few weeks, the news has been plagued with mass layoffs from the federal government, Trump ignoring judicial orders that tell him that he cannot arbitrarily withhold funds that Congress has already appropriated. And in my not so respectful opinion, the legacy media is doing a fucking awful job at telling people what is really at stake here. The truth of the matter is, we're heading toward a really dark place. And I want to be honest and really kind of flag here that I'm kind of scared shitless at what's going on in this country. This has been going on for a long time, but it feels like we've finally reached the head of the super fucking ugly pimple that is the United States of America. So, the reason why I picked this case to talk about today is actually because of a fucking tweet. You heard it, a tweet. Because unfortunately, broad strokes of policy that cause fucking chaos seem to be issued on Twitter or Truth Social nowadays instead of acts of Congress or press conferences or literally anything else. We learn about the downfall of our democracy through fascist social media. So, I want to talk about a particular tweet, which is from my favorite couch fucker, JD Vance. He, just in case you all forgot, is the vice president of the United States. And boy howdy, could I talk a entire episode on how much of a fucking charlatan this guy is. This Ivy League educated motherfucker who wrote Hillbilly Elegy to shit all over his mom who struggles with substance abuse and acts like being from Appalachia is apparently a fucking disastrous thing, and you all just need to work harder to get into Yale. You know what I mean? But anyway, JD Vance, this fucking guy, recently tweeted something that, quite frankly, made me want to hurl my coffee at the fucking wall. He said, and I'm quoting, "Judges aren't allowed to control the executive branch's legitimate power." Now, for people who aren't steeped in the law, like I am every single day of my fucking life, you might read that tweet and go, okay, I mean, if the executive branch's legitimate power, i.e., the president, is doing stuff, then why is this tweet a big deal? What does it matter? Here's why it matters. And I'm going to break it down like you have never seen Schoolhouse Rock's I'm Just a Bill, okay? Hear me out. The United States has three branches of government. There's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Three entirely separate, non-hierarchical forms of government because we have no king here for now. The legislative is the one that most people in the United States is pretty familiar with. That's Congress. Those are the people who we pay to send there to represent us. And right now, they're doing a bang up job of not really fucking doing anything. And they haven't really done anything in quite some time. The legislative over the last 20 years has really abdicated its responsibilities to the executive, which isn't necessarily Donald Trump's fault, but it also means that the executive has had quite a lot more power than I'm really comfortable with for a while. However, the judiciary, that's the court system, the federal court system, the Supreme Court of the United States, the guys and gals and theys in robes, they are the ones that really check the balances of power. So, in this hypothetical, let's say Congress passes a law that is just really bad, just fucking insane. And the president vetoes that law, doesn't sign it into power. That's a check on Congress, right? But Congress can override that veto with a supermajority in both of the houses. So let's say Congress overrides that veto and passes the insane law without the president because they have that supermajority. Then someone like the ACLU sues and says that this law is batshit insane. Eventually, this goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court of the United States says this law is unconstitutional and checks Congress. That, in a perfect world, is how our three branches of government should work. But according to J.D. Vance, the judiciary doesn't have that power, which is kind of weird, considering J.D. Vance is a fucking attorney. So let's pump the brakes. Right now, we have Donald Trump, who is just doing wild shit via executive order, dishing them out like Oprah has cars. And the judiciary across the country is saying, you can't do this, and is putting injunctions in place, forcing Trump to go back to the drawing board to try fascism one more time. And JD Vance is saying they can't do that. Well, JD Vance should probably go back to 1L of law school and sit back down in his constitutional law course where he was probably a scrawny little nobody that everyone fucking picked on because he's a fucking nerd, and reread the very first case that most law students read in law school, which is this little ditty called Marbury versus Madison. All right, gather round. The year is 1801. The country is still kind of new, but already the political drama is off the fucking charts. You guys have seen Hamilton, right? Let me tell you that the real story is way more fucking dramatic and also way more fucking depressing. Anyway, Thomas Jefferson is the incoming president, but before he takes office, his predecessor, John Adams, who was a Federalist, is trying to stack the courts with Federalist judges. And by stack, I mean he's giving out judgeships to literally anybody he can fucking find. I'm talking about guys that he met in a bar and he was like, "Do you want to be a judge and make Thomas Jefferson's life fucking miserable?" And guys were like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Do I get to be important?" And John Adams was like, "Totally. Here's your fucking judgeship." The thing is, Adams keeps doing it until the very last minute. And by last minute, I mean it's the night before Thomas Jefferson is set to take over the White House and become president. And Adams is like, fuck it. I'm going to give a bunch of appointments out in the middle of the night like a political Santa Claus, but with way less jolly and cookies and more spite and mayhem. This late night hustle became known as the midnight appointments. The goal was pretty simple. John Adams wanted to pack the courts with Federalists who were loyal to him and his party, so Jefferson's administration would have a hard time getting anything done. Sidebar, This is exactly what Mitch fucking McConnell did and why the federal judiciary is full of yahoos. It's the same this shit is still happening. Anyway, back to the 1800s. One of the people Adams appointed to be a judge is a guy named William Marbury. Now, throughout this story, Marbury was just a dude who wanted a job. He really wasn't anything special. He's basically a guy who was like, this is my moment. I'm going to be a judge. I'm going to have power. I'm going to wear a fancy fucking wig and read legal documents with authority. And John Adams was like, you, my friend, are a judge now. That is how this was happening. Anyway, this is kind of where it gets juicy. In order to become a judge, Marbury needed a writ written by the president to say you are a judge. Marbury was appointed, but he didn't have the writ. And he didn't actually get the writ hand in hand by the time that Jefferson got into office. So it was Jefferson's responsibility to dole out these writs. However, when Thomas Jefferson stepped into office the very next day, he said, fuck that. I'm not handing over these appointments that Adam pushed out in the middle of the night. Fuck that guy. No midnight judge club for me. I don't even know who William Marbury is. And then Jefferson sends his Secretary of State, James Madison, to not deliver those last minute commissions. Essentially, Jefferson said their asses can stay unemployed. They're not going to get any of these fucking jobs. Now, William Marbury, the guy who's all ready to just start dictating legal decisions, is like, wait, hold up. You can't just not give me my job. I was appointed by the president. That is what the law says. I deserve this job. The law that Marbury is talking about is the Judiciary Act of 1789. We'll get to that a bit later. But for the purposes of this story, just know that Marbury is right. There is a law that says he was appointed by the president and he should therefore be a judge. The end. So Jefferson was like, I don't give a shit. I'm not giving you this writ. And Marbury decides to do what any self-respecting person in 1801 would do. He sues the government. And not just anyone, he goes straight to the Supreme Court, which is, by the way, what the Judiciary Act of 1789 said he had to do. And Marbury says, y'all, I need this job. I got bills. Let's make this happen. One day I am going to be on this Supreme Court. You know what I mean? And this is where it gets weird, / interesting / historic. John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, took the case. And Marshall is the one who changed everything. So when Marbury sues, he asks the court to order James Madison to deliver his commission. But Marshall, while he is sympathetic with Marbury's plight, wasn't just going to hand him the job. Instead, he pulls off the greatest fucking legal masterstroke of all time. Marshall and the court look at the case, and here's what they come up with. Yes, Marbury had a right to the job. According to this law, Marbury should have the job. He should be a judge. But in a bit of a judicial jujitsu, Marshall says that the law that gave Marbury the right to do the job, the right to have this job, the Judiciary Act of 1789, was unconstitutional. So essentially, the court says, hey, you're totally right, Marbury. You do have the right to this job under this law, but we can't actually do anything about it because the law says that we can is in itself invalid. Sidebar. Listening to this in 2025, most people are like, yeah, okay, so the court says it's unconstitutional and therefore the law is bad and Marbury is just fucked, like sucks for him. But the law that says he can get the job is unconstitutional. That's what the Supreme Court does. But that was not a thing until Marbury versus Madison. And this is where judicial review comes into play. The idea that courts can strike down laws that go against the Constitution. Because, see, John Marshall didn't just rule on Marbury's specific case, he used this poor, dumb man's case to make the Supreme Court the final authority of what's constitutional. So from that moment on, the courts got the power to tell the president and the Congress when they've crossed the line. That is the check on executive power that we are all supposed to depend on. And it's been that way for hundreds of years. The Supreme Court's purpose in this system is to determine whether or not the laws that are passed by state and federal agencies and Congress and everything, whether or not they violate the core foundational document of this country, which is the United States Constitution. That's it. Without Marbury versus Madison, we would have no fucking courts. And now that we're in 2025, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. But the reason why JD Vance's dumbass tweet sent up flags of alarm in my head is exactly this. JD Vance is essentially saying that Marbury versus Madison, the case that states that the judiciary has the power to check the executive and the legislative, is, and we should all be pretty freaked out about that. The Trump administration currently has more power than any other executive before it. The main reason why is because of a case called Trump v. United States, in which Trump made the argument successfully that actions taken under official duties of the presidency were entitled to immunity. The entire prosecution stems from a lot of things. Trump kind of did a lot of illegal things on his way out the first time. He staged an insurrection. He also stole a bunch of classified documents and hid them in Mar-a-Lago's bathroom. I think we all forgot about that. Crazy. But the Department of Justice independently prosecuted Donald Trump for a lot of those crimes. And we were getting pretty close to a trial, which freaked Trump out. I mean, going from Mar-a-Lago to federal prison is kind of a bit much. So he did what any super rich guy would do and sue. And the Supreme Court fucking agreed with him. This is the first time that anyone in our country's history has effectively said that the president can do whatever they want, whenever they want, as long as it is an official action of the presidency. They cannot be criminally charged for it. The Department of Justice has a long-standing, not necessarily written down policy of not prosecuting presidents while they are sitting in office. In theory, I guess it kind of makes sense. It would be really annoying to haul the president out every single time you don't like what he or she is doing. Try them. It would be kind of a mess. And there's probably a lot of shit that the president does that is really fucking illegal that most of us don't even know about. But Trump attempted an insurrection against the United States. He tried to stage a coup d'etat and stop a fair and free election from occurring. Thankfully, it didn't happen that day because the coup d'etat was less military and more a bunch of people who have watched and probably played way too much Call of Duty thinking that they could pull off a military coup d'etat. But it happened. January 6th happened. And while the system moved way too slowly and not aggressively enough for my liking and most people's liking, Trump decided to sue. And he clawed his way all the way up to the Supreme Court to where he had appointed judges that were politically and ideologically aligned with him. And the Supreme Court said, "You are immune." I bring this up not to be depressing, but to highlight the fact that Marbury versus Madison is already hanging by a thread. Congress has all but abdicated its responsibility to keep the executive in check. The Republicans clearly don't give a fuck of what Trump is doing. And the Democratic Party, instead of reaching out to people and staging sit ins and protests and getting themselves arrested for once, they've decided to turn around and yell at their own constituents and organizations like MoveOn.org for calling them, begging them to do literally anything. So all that's left is the judiciary. And right now, I don't really know how much it's going to be able to stop anything, which means it's entirely up to us. Now, you might be feeling powerless in this moment, and trust me, I get it. I'm an attorney who works at a nonprofit. I have been scrambling since January 20th. We've gotten threats of our federal funding being revoked. I have clients freaking out that God only knows. Enter any complaint or stress that you have had in the last couple of weeks and magnify it by 15, and you might get close to what people living in poverty are feeling right now. But we're not powerless. The people are never powerless. And here's the thing, there are more of us than there are of them. So here are some things you can do to make your screaming into the void actually productive. Sitting in despair is not going to stop fascism. Tweeting about it is not going to help. And getting into arguments with boomers on Facebook, while fun, not exactly productive. So here's some things that you can actually do. 1, annoy the living shit out of your representatives federally. You can call the Capitol switchboard at 202-224-3121 and get the direct link up to your Senate or House representatives. You should leave them a message detailing exactly why you think this is out of control. It can be about anything. It can be about the fact that you are trans and you really need your representative to step the fuck up and protect you. You can tell them that Roe versus Wade is already gone, and it's really not inspired to see your representative either not doing fucking anything or actively working to take away the rights and liberties of over half the people in this country. You can talk about LGBTQ rights. You can demand that Congress do something to check this encroaching step into fascism. I don't care what you talk about, but call them every day, at least once. Emails, pointless. You could write letters. You can even fax them for all I care. But make yourselves loud and annoying. Second, you should get in contact with your state representatives. States have an immense amount of power to protect people right now. For example, in Connecticut, I just authored testimony to support an amendment to our state constitution that enshrines LGBTQ and abortion rights in my state. It's likely going to go to ballot, and it's pretty popular, which means that Connecticut can continue being a sanctuary for people who need it most. Call your representatives, get in touch with them, go meet them at their offices, ask for appointments, talk to their liaisons. Trust me, people calling them and engaging with the system makes them pay attention. If they get a lot of calls or letters about a specific issue, they are going to act right because you are the ones that pay their salaries. Got it? Third, make yourself inconvenient. If you see ICE wandering around, you can record them. You can make yourselves annoying. You can pass out know your rights information to people in your community. You can make food for your neighbors. You can sign yourself up for abortion clinic walks. Do something that protects people that are being impacted by this terror regime the most. There is no such thing as neutrality in the face of fascism. You can't sit on the couch and hope that it's going to get better. You have to actively do something. And there is something for everybody, no matter your walk of life, no matter rich or poor, black or white, disabled or abled. There is something for everybody. And for folks like me, folks who are white, college educated, and documented citizens, we have the most power to be able to protect our neighbors in need. So, if you're sitting here listening to this podcast and you haven't called your representatives and you haven't checked on your neighbors and you haven't written to your state representatives to ask for protections enshrined in your state constitutions, and if you haven't volunteered at your local soup kitchen, and if you haven't gone to your public library to organize programs and talk to your neighbors about how this is scary, get your fucking shit together, man. There is no neutrality in the face of fascism. I come to Justice Sotomayor's dissent in Trump versus United States. It's powerfully written, but the ending paragraphs are probably the most poignant. She writes, looking beyond the fate of this particular prosecution, the long-term consequences of today's decision are stark. The court effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding. This new Officials Act immunity now, quote, lies about like a loaded weapon, end quote, for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation. The President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country and possibly the world. When he uses his official powers in any way under the majority's reasoning, he now shall be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power? Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon? Immune. Immune, immune, immune. Let the president violate the law. Let him exploit the trappings of his office for personal gain. Let him use his official power for evil ends. Because if he knew that he may one day face liability for breaking the law, he might not be as bold and fearless as we would like him to be. That is the majority's message today. Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president and the people he serves has shifted irrevocably. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. The majority's single-minded fixation on the president's need for boldness and dispatch ignores the countervailing need for accountability and restraint. The framers were not so single-minded. In the Federalist Papers, after endeavoring to show that the executive designed by the Constitution combines all the requisites to energy, Alexander Hamilton asked a separate, equally important question. Does it also combine the requisites to safety in a Republican sense, a due dependence on the people, a due responsibility? The answer then was yes, based in part upon the president's vulnerability to prosecution in the common course of law. The answer after today is no. Never in the history of our republic has a president had reason to believe that he would be immune from criminal prosecution if he used the trappings of his office to violate the criminal law. Moving forward, however, all former presidents will be cloaked in such immunity. If the occupant of that office misuses official power for personal gain, the criminal law that the rest of us must abide will not provide a backstop. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of America, What the Fuck? I'm Chelsea, and we'll see you on the next episode. I think I'm going to start doing these episodes every other week because this is a lot. but I really enjoy doing it. Remember to rate, like, and subscribe wherever you are listening to this, and take care of each other.